But I'm Tom Edwards. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm the Chief Digital Innovation Officer for the agency business at Epsilon. So today, we're going to talk about the future. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about Gen Z. We're going to talk about technology that empowers behavior and how things are going to shift. And I'm going to do it through the lens of, we're going to start here. So what do you start and end your day with? What connects you with loved ones? What gets you from point A to point B? Do you have a guess yet? I think I've already given it away. It's your mobile device, right? So if you haven't already, if you don't already have it out, take it out. Take a look at it real quick. Think about your relationship with it. Think about how many times a day that you check it. And if you want to tweet during the course of this presentation, it's at BlackFin360. Totally cool if you want to. Leave it up to you. But the thing to really think about, we have more computing power now in our hands than any generation prior to us. But what's going to happen is our primary way of interfacing with technology is fundamentally going to change. It's going to move beyond just the mobile device. And so we're going to talk about that today. But before we go to the future, I like to start in the past. So growing up in the mid-'70s, yes, I'm dating myself a little bit, I was a huge Star Wars fan. Still am. Last Jedi aside. Put that away for right now. But going back to the 70s, and, my friends all wanted to be Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, and they loved the characters. Me, I was really interested in how C-3PO and R2-D2 actually worked, and how the technology in the Star Wars universe seemed to empower the characters every step of the way. But growing up in the 80s, and I'm a huge gamer, I still am to this day as well, growing up in the 80s, gaming was a little bit different. 8-bit, 16-bit, not quite like the crazy graphics and performance engines that we see today. And you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with banking? We'll get there, promise. But we got to start with a little bit of fun stuff here. So this is my favorite game from the 80s. But gaming was self-contained. There was no Xbox Live, there was no co-op at the time. I also loved giant robot shows. You're beginning to see a little bit of theme here throughout the entire thing. Robots, Star Wars, okay, all right. But I loved Voltron and Robotech and all these giant robot shows. The point being, though, entertainment in the 80s, it was predetermined. If I missed a show, I'd have to wait months to catch up. It's not like all of the just on-demand access that kids have today. So, all right, everybody knows this screen, right? Yeah, dialing up, you hear the sound in your head, dialing up, connecting, you've got mail, right? So as we move from the 80s into the 90s, we begin to see the rise of connectivity. So connectivity through AOL, and then obviously everybody remembers trying to download pictures in the 90s. Took a little while, right? You can go grab a sandwich, a cup of coffee or something as you're waiting, and it takes a little while to get to the end, and then you get confirmation, you're done. And obviously, we saw the rise of the graphical user interface, tied to Apple and specifically now with Windows during that time. But coming back to our initial point of conversation, the mobile device. We begin to see the rise of mobile in the 90s. We see hundreds of different form factors, lots of different device types. And as we move into the 90s, you see it right down there in the little tiny corner. Computing at this time was primarily confined to the desktop. Just like most computing today is primarily done through the mobile device. So as we're looking at the 90s, all right, going into the mid-2000s, moment of truth here. So this is a safe place. How many of you actually had the Motorola Razr? Raise your hand. Let's see it. Oh, yeah, look at the room. Remember trying to text with this thing, the 3 numbers, 3 letters? It was not really, it really wasn't easy. But anyway, the Motorola Razr is a really good kind of example about innovation and disruption. When you think about disruption, disruption is primarily removing a barrier. And innovation is building on something that's familiar. So as you're thinking about the Razr and the fact that it looked like phones that you'd had previously, fast forward into 2007 with the iPhone, multiple form factors into one, streamlined touch interface, it was amazing. But in my mind, it wasn't necessarily the launch of the Apple iPhone that ushered in kind of this era of smartphones. It was really the App Store. Because when you start thinking about it, it was when we were able to democratize third parties to where we could create personalized experiences that made it our own. Now we have hundreds of applications on our phone. There are 180 billion app downloads that have occurred to date. So it's incredibly important to understand that this is a very important moment because we're beginning to see the shift towards empowerment of the consumer. And now, 5 years after the launch of the iPhone, you had 1 in 5 people that had a smartphone. Now remember that 1 in 5 number because it's going to come up again later in the presentation. We're talking about a new technology. So when you start thinking about this, fast forward to today, 95% of people have a mobile device. 77% of those are smartphones. It's basically that ubiquity leads to accessibility. And accessibility leads to empowerment. So you start looking at, we're empowered to create now. Obviously, we create 400 million selfies last year. 95 million of those ended up on Instagram. 300 minutes of YouTube content that were created. So we're empowered to create. We're also powered to amplify. And what I mean by that is, you look at our dependency on social media now, our expectation for on-demand content. It needs to be almost in real time. So how we consume content's shifting and evolving. Even today, even traditional social media now is shifting beyond traditional social posts from a brand personification standpoint. And now the story format is going to surpass the traditional social format very quickly. That just came out yesterday. We're also, this idea of influence has shifted as well. So influence no longer comes from Hollywood. It comes from YouTube celebrities and streamers, especially for those 13 to 18. So as we think about all of these kind of implications, this shift towards empowerment, the way I like to look at the future state is I like to filter it. So I look at three fundamental things. I look at technology that empowers consumers. I look at exponential, which is intelligent systems that are going to further accelerate how we interact and the systems that interact with us. And I look at enhanced. It's that combination of physical and digital reality. So this is going to be the lens in which we're going to look at and talk about this fundamental shift that's coming to where the mobile device is no longer going to be the primary way in which you interface with technology. All right, we're going to start with empower. This is really important because a lot of people don't realize the fundamental impact that Gen Z is going to have on the marketplace. That's tied to either retail banking, that's tied to many other facets here. So these are my kids, 15, 13, 10 years old. They're part of the first mobile-first generation. They learn to swipe before they learn to speak. And they're going to represent 40% of consumers by the year 2020. And their behaviors, not only my children, but beyond, it's interesting to see the behavior. So 2.5 hours a day spent with on-demand content, 2.5 hours. That's game streams. They view YouTube as a remote control. It's all about control. The behavioral connection here is the control over experience. The second part is gaming. So they spend 1.5 hours a day gaming. That's my son Gavin in the middle. He's 15. He's an aspiring esports athlete. Oh, that sparked a lot of conversations in our house. Do you know that University of North Texas now has a varsity esports team? It's insane. 300 million people are watching and viewing competitive gaming. It's crazy. But yes, it's athletics of the mind is how he says it. My wife's like, yeah, whatever. So that's going on. All right. So as we look forward to music plays a big role. So 51 minutes a day are spent with music. And music is the primary use case for Gen Z when we're talking about conversational experiences. You think about smart speakers, you think of Alexa, you think of Google Assistant. So we're already seeing shifts in behavior. But this is one of the biggest shifts tied to empower that we need to understand. That's fundamentally going to transform marketing over the course of the next few years. So it's the fact that the camera has become the home screen. We've kind of evolved over time as we interact. We saw the jokes tied to, Windows as an operating system, et cetera. But for Gen Z, it starts with the camera. Now before, the way we use a camera primarily, it's about capture, And actually Gen Z takes about 1 hour of selfies a week. And I can validate that with my daughter, for sure, 1 hour. 1,000 pictures to get one. Like, all right, got it, good. But you think about it now, the camera is shifting to a communication device. So it's replacing previous forms of communication. They're moving past, previous generations wrote letters, others, actually picked up the phone and called each other. If I actually asked my kids to call someone, they had no idea what to do. Like, if I can't see them, why would I do this? But communication is key. And it's also a platform for expression. One thing that's incredibly interesting is that 69% of Gen Z views the camera as a platform to create from. 66% have their own YouTube channel. They're full on about creation. It's not about creating content to connect with this generation. It's about enabling their creativity, which is incredibly important to understand. And here's some staggering numbers. So Snapchat, 70 million people every day, use augmented reality filters, the little fun faces and everything else. That's a form of AR. So it's the camera being used as a portal into expression. They're spending a couple minutes a day, and they're actually taking and sharing that content as static content as well. 200 million shares that are happening. This is real-time data that's being integrated into an AR-based experience. But we have to understand that as the camera becomes more intelligent, and this is going to be the tie-in to artificial intelligence as we move forward. So, but as we think about, a couple years ago, how many in the room have kids? Raise your hands. How many of your kids were playing Pokemon Go, or you were playing Pokemon Go? 50 million people played Pokemon Go. And it's a kitschy, fun little game. You go out and catch Pokemon or whatever. But it's an underlying behavior of using the lens as a viewport into the world to explore. And the other thing that's happening now is that the camera's becoming democratized. You're seeing this rapid push. You saw Facebook announce just the other day that they basically added AR features into Messenger and into Instagram. And Messenger is a very important topic we'll get to here shortly, especially from a financial services perspective. But the key thing to remember is that the camera is the next marketing platform, at least for Gen Z. So when you think about technology that empowers, just store that away. That one is for free today. So, okay, we're mainly going to talk about AI, but I wanted to at least get this conversation started because they're all interrelated. The thing that you'll hear mostly is that the camera and AR is separate from AI, is separate from blockchain, is separate from all these technologies. The reality is all of these technologies are converging to redefine how we interact within our environments. And so it's important to understand the behaviors that are driving this. That's why I always like to look at and better understand the behavior that's driving the usage of technology, or is the technology driving the behavior? It's incredibly important to understand. So now we're going to shift into, we've moved from empower, now we're going to talk about exponential. We're going to talk about AI. And you're seeing so much shifting that's happening now, even from an organizational perspective. You see Microsoft, Google, now Facebook, all stating that they're AI-first organizations. Facebook placed a stake in the ground in 2014 saying we're mobile first. Now they've shifted. What this actually means is that they've actually taken and reconfigured their organizations to basically provide new platforms, new tools for all of you to kind of work with. And what's happening now is AI is definitely a hot topic to discuss in the marketplace right now. But what I used to talk about this idea of disruption being the new normal. You talk about how the iPhone and the App Store kind of disrupted everything. Now it's about convergence. So as we talk about the role of AI, there are a couple preconceived notions we have to get out of the way first, all right? So the first one is basically, come back to me. Most of our expectations around AI it comes from entertainment. It's Skynet and Terminator. We're going to become batteries in the Matrix, HAL 9000 from Space Odyssey. But the reality is there are three types of AI. There's artificial narrow intelligence, which is kind of the Siri or Alexa voice services or Google Assistant, which you're working with on a daily basis. Artificial general intelligence. Think about an incredibly smart Alexa, right, that can answer any specific questions that you may have. Come back to me. There we go. Thank you. And ultimately, super AI. I'm not a big believer in super AI taking over the world, so anyway, just putting that out there. But there are three primary reasons why we're seeing this just massive, rapid increase and acceleration of AI. And it starts with, first, the hardware side, graphical processing units. That's where you can basically parallel between graphics as well as processing. Comes through. The second is probably the most important, and this is going to be where we're going to spend a little bit of time. Data is oil for AI. We spent, last year, 10 trillion gigabytes of data was created. 10 trillion. So we talked a lot about big data over the past few years, but the reality is, if you're not actually able to action off of that data, that's actually going to drive the business forward. So much, being a part of Epsilon, it's interesting because I've got a number of access to proprietary data sources. I talk to hundreds of companies, and I see it time and time again, to where most organizations don't have a comprehensive data strategy that's laying the groundwork for being able to shift towards these intelligent systems and models that can drive the business forward. So what I want to do a little bit today is demystify data for just a minute and talk about the importance of structured and unstructured data as fuel for intelligent systems and building a corpus of data. Structured data is like data of identity. That's known data, that's your first party data, that's what you know about the individuals or whatever it is that you're tracking against. Unstructured is everything else that's happening in the world. So that's cultural data, that's reviews, that's conversational, et cetera. And as you prepare for integration of AI into systems, especially to derive insights and drive business strategy, it's important to understand, first, you have to structure the data in a way that the attributes are set. And what I mean by that, we have a data set that has about 200 million people in it. It's got 2,000 attributes on an individual. But the reality is I don't need 2,000 attributes to know something about you as an individual. If there's a specific behavior that I want to understand, I need to be able to take that and action off of that. So whatever your data sets are, however your first-party data is structured, it's incredibly, incredibly important that you're setting yourself up for either leveraging machine learning or deep learning. And we'll talk on that in just a minute. So the other side of this, too, is how you actually dimensionalize it. So I'm a big believer that in order to drive business strategy, we reviewed hundreds and hundreds of creative briefs. And it came back, there were 4 primary business drivers for almost everything that our clients do. It's acquisition, growth, win back, retention. Those are the 4 core territories. So what my team and I have actually done is we've taken and redefined how we view data sets and attributes, applied intelligence systems to it, so we can dimensionalize the data, basically filter it and create new models on the fly so that we can ultimately get to the most important point, which I'll come back to this slide, which is predictive decisioning. The number one thing that's going to drive adoption of artificial intelligence systems to enhance our lives, to empower us, our technology to adapt to us versus us adapting to it, is the ability to drive predictive decisioning. And especially for the financial services sector, this is incredibly important. We're seeing it come to life. There's a little bit of a difference between predictive analytics and the type of predictive algorithms and decisioning systems that I'm talking about. So going back just a little bit in terms of continual education, machine learning is human-coded algorithms. That's people creating different models and different ways in which to analyze data. So we've been playing with machine learning for the last 24 months. We're able to identify themes, occasions, perceptions across a number of large data sets so we can actually drive some viable strategy. But the other piece here is really around deep learning. Deep learning is where you've got these neural networks that are designed like the human brain. And what they're trying to do is they can train themselves over time. You think about, you've probably seen it in the news about AlphaGo and basically where the system beat a grandmaster, where the game continually trains and learns itself. The other thing to consider, most organizations that I see from an innovation perspective are incredibly linear, which basically means that in order to integrate new technologies, new systems, new ways of working, it can be somewhat difficult because you've got all these legacy systems in place, you've got all these other kind of fiefdoms that have kind of popped up. But what's important is understanding, just from an organizational perspective, we have to move from rules-based models to algorithms in order to basically process and analyze this amount of information to actually make it viable for an organization. So, and I'm also a big believer in intelligence augmentation, that we should be able to use these tools to basically take the data and enhance our workers' lives. So there are really 10 top hot AI topics right now: natural language, speech, virtual agents, machine learning, hardware. And it's interesting that those are the top, because I'm going to bring it back to the consumer for a second. That was kind of the primer on AI and the primer on leveraging data and making sure your data is structured appropriately to actually maximize these systems. All right, come back to me, thank you. But now we're going to shift. Now, we talked at the very beginning about the mobile device and how we use this every day. We're coming up on a time very quickly, and I'm going to give you an actual date when it's going to happen. That's the fun part. So when we're going to be moving beyond the mobile device towards our environment adapting to us. And there are 3 steps to this. It's voice, it's vision, and it's touch. So it's this idea of multimodal interfaces. And what we're going to see over time is we're going to see the shift towards our expectations of our technology to adapt to us, the importance of predictive decisioning. So as we get into voice is the first one to achieve scale. Remember I said the 1 in 5 number? Well, I'll bring it back for a second. Chatbots. So 2016 was the year of the chatbot. So Facebook revealed some interesting numbers the other day. They now have 300,000 bots on their platform. How many of you in this room right now have some type of chat bot associated with your brand that you're either working on or associated with? Arms. Okay, good. I like the little half arm raise here. No one's like wanting to own it. Like, it's there. Yeah, okay. All right. But this is incredibly important because there are certain expectations now that consumers have. You should especially start looking at millennials, Gen Zs. 69% of them actually want to have an expectation to have an on-demand conversation with a brand 24 hours a day, real-time or asynchronous. It's just the new reality of working now. And it's interesting, actual business results are actually being driven through Messenger. There's an organization called Snap Travel. It's a 100% travel business run primarily through Messenger and the Messenger ecosystem. First year went from $0 to $1 million. Second year, $1 million to $10 million, all based on just Messenger-based interactions. And it's incredibly important because social messaging surpassed social media in like 2016. So the primary way that people interact with each other is now through Messenger, not through primary social channels. I had a CMO ask me the other day, how come, should I expect engagement to continue to happen on primary social channels? And it's like, you've got to view primary social now as a media channel versus just but we can talk about personification and all that later. But conversational experiences, you can have 100 different use cases within a single thread. What Plum is doing is they're using a conversational chat bot that's actually able to then analyze a person's financial account, pull their spare change, make recommendations, and move forward. Bank of America is doing it with Erica. There are a number of different, organizations that are leveraging chat experiences, and that's kind of the easy way in to start with voice. But now I want to talk about voice-based systems. 1 in 5 homes right now currently has a voice-based system. 1 in 5. So Amazon currently owns about 70% of the footprint right now, the landscape. Google makes up the other 30%. But the interesting thing to consider here is that the most important thing to understand is that voice assistants aren't just smart speakers that sit on your home. It's about the voice service. That's going to be pervasive across device type, across watches, home, in your home as a speaker, in your car, on your television. There are now 30,000 skills associated with Amazon Alexa skill services. And the one thing that they did recently that's incredibly important to pay attention to is they launched something called Blueprints. Blueprints will actually allow you as an individual to take and customize your own skill. So if we want to leave notes for a babysitter or do something like that, we can quickly and easily take that and have it adapt to us. That is a key fundamental piece that's missing, is the democratization of the technology to everyone else. That is when things accelerate. So that's beginning to happen. The other important thing to understand and note, I met with Amazon while at CES. And one of the things that was discussed and recently revealed in the news, I can talk about it now finally, is that they moved their entire pay organization, Amazon Pay, into the Alexa team. Think about that for a minute. Think about, that's a huge move, and it's very telling in terms of where they want to go in terms of their payment services within the voice platform. Not as a separate entity, but within the Alexa team. Now, the other side of this is Google. So as you start thinking about Google, yes, they're only at 20%, but I'd be very hard-pressed not to bet against them, because there are 200 million devices currently right now running Google Assistant. Google Assistant is also tied into the Google Knowledge Graph. So everything that's happening from a search perspective, all these things are kind of interrelated. And you can build actions within this, you can deep link within this, they support third-party payments externally. But it's incredibly important to understand, as an organization, you have to have a strategy for both desktop, mobile, conversational, and voice. Because, I'll tell you why. What we're going to do is, we as people are going to continue to become used to the role that AI is going to play in our lives. In my research, and I research across generational cohorts, Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, et cetera, Boomer. The number one thing that pops up is, as long as the technology provides convenience and ease of use, that's the number one thing in terms of adoption. What's going to end up happening, in my mind, is this concept of the proxy web. What that basically means is that we're going to continue to see over the next few years that virtual assistants are going to begin to play a more important role in our lives on a daily basis. You're going to begin to see this shift to where instead of now, if my associate Rob and I want to go to dinner, we have to text each other, oh, hey, where do you want to go, what type of food, etc. Moving forward, the assistant understands and knows our food preferences. It understands the specific places, and it can work behind the scenes to just enable our lives and make it easier. So that is one example of the proxy web. This is also where I see probably the most immediate application of blockchain at scale. Because if you've got virtual assistants now that are taking and transacting on your behalf, this is the other interesting piece. So when you start looking at the generational research, Gen Z wants to use these systems to kind of predict, to schedule personal meetings. But you look at millennials, they want to actually drive frequent purchase through these systems. Here's the really interesting one. Gen X wants to manage their finances through these virtual assistants. I'll say it again. There is a heavy correlation between Gen X and management of finances through these virtual assistants to just help make it easier. That was a huge aha moment, especially tied to financial services. So what this leads to is that us as marketers, we have to understand there's a shift coming. We always talk about consumer-centric marketing or connecting with the consumer, customer decision journeys. The reality is, with the rise of these additional systems and inputs, it's no longer going to just be about the individual consumer. It's also going to be about the system and the algorithm. How, if a virtual assistant is essentially buying on your behalf, how do I convince an algorithm or a system? Because there's not an emotional connection with that. So again, understanding your role within these different ecosystems is going to be incredibly important so that you can influence both people and algorithms. Hugely important. And people don't understand how quickly this is coming. 2020 is only 2 years away, by the way. That blew my mind the other day. I was sitting there, preparing for a talk, and all of a sudden, 2020 is 2 years. There you go. All right. So we've talked about empower. We've talked about exponential. Now, we're going to talk about enhanced. It's this connection of physical to digital. It's the it's the vision and the touch aspect that's going to play a key role. So again, voice, vision, touch. Now we're going to talk about vision and touch. But first, we talked about AR. We talked about the camera as a point of exploration. What's going to end up happening is that place data is going to be incredibly important during this time as well. So Google and others, Facebook, they've opened up their places graph, 140 different million locations. So as you in retail banking, this is kind of important to pay attention to. I'll come back to why. Audio augmented reality. I can't believe I put that picture in there. Okay. But audio augmented reality, I saw this at South by Southwest. And normally when we think about augmented reality, we think about heads-up display. But what actually was really interesting, and the thing that really stuck with me, is that Bose is actually using audio AR. So they're using invisible location-based cues to then enact a voice-based interaction with your environment. It's very seamless. It wasn't intrusive. It was very interesting. So the role that voice plays is going to be interesting. That's how voice is going to begin to transition into AR. Here's where it gets really interesting. One of the biggest trends I predicted heading into 2018 was computer vision. It's a form of AI. So computer vision essentially allows you to basically take and assess your environment, pull out high-dimensional elements from it, and drive decisioning off of it. So it's incredibly important to consider. We saw it at CES as well. And when you start thinking about it, Facebook actually just had their developer conference the other day. And they're continuing to advance their vision of computer vision. What's happening here, this is a technology called dense pose. Now Facebook is able to track in real time, in real speed, basically take and outline you as an entire individual so that you can overlay AR-based things in real time and stitch it together immediately. The processing capability and power of that was just unheard of even a few years ago. So it's interesting. And you think about the role that computer vision plays in redefining retail. So a lot of startups that I saw at both CES and South by Southwest. This is a picture inside the Amazon Go concept store in Seattle. But you start thinking about the role that the systems play. The systems are beginning to make the decisions. So it's able to analyze what's happening within an environment and ultimately make a specific recommendation or decision or transaction or something that happens after that. Another thing that's really interesting, this one I found kind of funny, only in China. So this is Baidu and Kentucky Fried Chicken. They're using facial recognition technology to dynamically recommend what you should order from KSC based on your facial expression. That could go one of two ways really quickly. Oh, hey, you need a 20-piece. Hey, all right, okay, cool. So regardless, again, only in China. But it goes to show, again, how trying to leverage facial recognition using the camera to assess your environment is important. But what I take away from it, go back to our discussion around the camera for a second as a marketing platform. Now, if you're able to align the camera with virtual assistants, you can drive new forms of interaction within your environment. You can scan different things. You can have a direct correlation to what that actually is or what it means within a virtual assistant. You can take and look at a physical location and pop up things that aren't there, basically, and have an understanding or a contextual understanding of your environment. This is where we're heading, and this is where you can begin to imagine the jump from your phone to another device, whether that's glasses. All of the big major players right now have patents out on AR glasses, all of them. And the other thing that's really interesting too, when you look at the research, millennials and Gen Zs are obviously the ones most open to glasses and contacts. Not implants though, surprisingly, like one too many Black Mirror episodes maybe? I don't know, that's a little creepy. Anyway, I heard one laugh, so one Black Mirror fan in the crowd. Netflix, all right, there we go. It's not a fun presentation if there aren't pop culture references. That's for free too. All right, the third one is touch. So as we think about gesture-based interfaces and natural interfaces, in order for our environment to truly adapt to us, we need to be able to control our environment in multiple ways, whether that's through voice, whether that's through touch, whether that's through gesture. So natural interfaces are going to be incredibly key as we shift towards this idea of ambient computing. All right, clickety-click. And now you start pulling it all together. Now you've got AR, now you've got gesture and touch-based, to where you can actually interact spatially with different elements or entities. So yes, they're playing with a shark here, but this applies to, Snap recently showed some really interesting, and Facebook did as well. Facebook integrated AR into Messenger, and they were giving examples of different retailers, everything from Nike to BMW, to how they're basically showcasing the cars and full products. Come back, thank you. Into it as well. And this one's just always fun. This one's always a little creepy. Most people, when they think about augmented reality and they think about the convergence of these things, and fun fact while the video is playing, if I had it to do all over again, I would have gone to law school for digital rights management. That industry is going to be huge in terms of basically trying to control what's seen within actual physical locations within digital. So anyway, you can't also have a video without a giant cat in it, without talking about internet. But it's interesting. You can start looking at different ways in which you're interacting within the shopping experience. You see your little fun dog there that's, basically a loyalty mechanism, walking through the store, different elements kind of pop up associated with your personalized preferences, et cetera. It's just a fun mock-up of what it could potentially look like moving forward. But how are we going to get there? How are we going to go from this mobile device towards everything that we talked about momentarily? And I'll tell you. While preparing for this talk, I realized that I've had 18 different mobile devices over the last 20 years, 18. And especially over the last, since 2007, the operating system has been the one consistent thing that's been a part of this experience over time. The form factors change, the hardware, performance-wise changes, but the operating system fundamentally has not been disrupted. The Apple App Store has not been disrupted since 2008. We all have hundreds of applications on our phone, yet we only use 5 to 10. So what's happening is organizations like Google are developing experimental operating systems that put the virtual assistant at the center. So that's how it's going to start. It's going to start with this disintermediation of applications to where the operating system becomes the assistant. And we're going to see the shift to what's called scene design. So instead of me having to check into a flight via a separate application, input into my navigation, turn on the pool when I come home, and turn on music so I can hang out with my family, it happens in the background. So what ends up happening is the operating system the assistant already knows and understands, I like to check in 2 hours before a flight, submits me for an upgrade. It automatically pre-routes my destination of where I'm going to go. When I come home, it knows the preferences that I have, the temperatures to heat the pool, music to get the kids out of their rooms downstairs. Like that's how we see this kind of evolution to scene design coming. And it's going to fundamentally change, and it's something that's kind of scary for a lot of organizations because there's a lot of dependency of, we need to launch a native application. yes, you still need, native applications are still viable and relevant for the next few years, but you also have to be thinking about and designing for these future state experiences that are coming much faster than you realize, and there are a couple fundamental steps you can take to start with that, like owning your brand experience within a conversational ecosystem, via chatbots or within Alexa and Google Assistant. So when is this going to happen? What's the date? Conducted a lot of research on this topic, a lot of discussions from 2021 to 2044. But my prediction, based on the exponential growth and acceleration of technology, as well as behavioral, as well as where some of these certain things are, 10 years out. We're 10 years away from multimodal at scale. That means new forms of interfaces that are going to help us and allow our environment to adapt to us versus us adapting to the environment. So there are a couple things that I want you to take away from this presentation. So doing a little recap here for you. Number one, understanding the role the camera is going to play with your consumers moving forward. It's moving well beyond a capture device, it's a communication device, but it's also how do you enable their experiences and creativity. The second is what I call the new 4 Ps. So I teach also at SMU in Dallas, taught thousands of students on the principles of marketing, product, price, place, promotion. I look at it as 4 fundamental things. It's psychographics, predictive, proxy, pervasive. Things to keep in mind as you're thinking about how to navigate these new worlds. Psychographics, basically everything we talked about, and it basically means having a solid data strategy that combines unstructured, structured data that aligns to your overarching business goals. That's one. The second piece is predictive decisioning. This is one of the most important pieces, but you can't drive or create predictive models if you don't have a good corpus of data or an understanding of what you're ultimately trying to accomplish. You can't just sprinkle a little AI on it and expect it to go and really drive your business forward. The third piece is designing for the proxy web and understanding behaviorally that it's coming. Understand how you fit and what role you play within these specific ecosystems, within Alexa, within Google, within Siri, once third-party developer opportunities arise. Understand that this is happening and make sure that you're controlling those experiences. So here's what happens. If you don't have a Google skill right now, your brand is completely dependent on whatever the search ranking is associated with whatever that experience is. You can't control it. Whereas if you have an action launched, you can branch that, you can control how people are interacting across those various systems. 1 in 5 homes now has a smart speaker. So if you're not already thinking about the role that voice plays, you should be. And the final is pervasive design. It's understanding, it's not just designing for desktop and mobile. It's designing ultimately first for voice, and a voice-first UX experience is different than a traditional web experience and how you create those. It's understanding the role that vision is going to play, computer vision, and ultimately with touch as well. So just thinking about this whole construct and idea of moving forward. But that's it. That is what I call the E-3 framework of multimodal voice, vision, and touch. We left about 4.5 minutes left for questions. So I always get the same reaction at the end of this presentation. People are either like, whoa, or like, yeah. So I'm feeling more of the whoa with this crowd right now. I'm kind of looking across the room, and it's like, what just happened? It's 9 in the morning. Thought I was going to hear about AI and boring ROI so I could continue and like take a nap or something. But questions? Anybody? Anybody? Questions? Question? Yes, sir. They're coming with the mic for you.
I was curious about the reaction to implants, because there are
Yes.
some companies that they'll do like, it's about the size of a grain of rice, they implant it, and here you can buy soda, but you see, even with the younger generations, that's not going to catch on? Or?
Yeah, anything that's invasive or requires surgery at this point, not necessarily. You're seeing some new wearable technology to where they can basically do it like a tattoo on your skin now that's not permanent, so they're like electrodes that tie into that. That's one thing. There's brain control interfaces that kind of connect to the back of your behind your ear, and they can connect in. So I think more of the trend is moving towards those type of interfaces to where it's not permanent and a little less scary. All right, yes.
So we're a community bank in South Louisiana, and after hearing this, and I've been fighting for it for years, but is that to even think about getting into AI, we need to have clean data.
Correct.
And that's one of our biggest pain points. I can say it all the time, to spell the word correctly in the damn box, but it doesn't mean they're going to.
Right.
And so, our core is just, it's got, and hopefully I'm not the only one speaking about this, but our core has a ton of dirty data in it. And I've been telling my boss, I'm like, we really need to focus on this. So she asked me particularly to come to this session, and so what I'm taking from it is we need to start with our data.
Correct.
To even go there.
Yeah, that is like the gasoline for your car. Like, you can have the best, car on the planet, and Rob's a car guy, so he knows. But without the right fuel, you're not going to go anywhere. And so I've done so many of these talks specifically on data. I was in a room with, hundreds of marketers and talked about data strategy, and people look at you like you have like the fish from The Simpsons with the 3 eyes or whatever. But that is the number one step. You have to have, an understanding of what you want to do with it. It's not just the fact that you have it. It's you've got first-party data, but then ultimately, where are you trying to get to? Are you trying to get to a predictive analytics scenario to where you can predict certain things through these interfaces? That's going to require a certain level of understanding. Like, there are different things you have to have foundationally set. And the number one thing is education. So coming to things like this, or having people like myself or associates coming to your organization and having that conversation to help educate on what clean data should be and how you should be using structured and unstructured data to drive the business, that's really key. Questions?
Oh, over here.
Anyone else? Oh, hi. Hello. It's hard to see with the lights. Hi.
Can you give us some examples of unstructured data? Many financial institutions have great structured data, clean and unclean, but how do you mix in the unstructured data?
Absolutely. So I'll use an esports example here. One of the things, since I mentioned in gaming and my son is a gamer, I wanted to take and really understand, is there a way that I can align different genres of gamers with different personality types? So I used kind of this ocean model of openness, conscientiousness, et cetera. And I was able to use basically anything that's available on the open web that's non-private data. So that's anything from forum discussions to reviews to whatever else. And then you're able to do some interesting things. We were able to actually build an index that showed a correlation between the gamers, the genres, and the brands that most likely associate with those. I mean, so you can pull out themes, occasions, perceptions. It's a great way to enhance kind of segmentation when you're thinking about how you're going to, identify new audience types. So there are a number of ways you can use unstructured data to do that, and machine learning is a great way to drive that through. Any other question? One more?
Hello
Hi.
there.
Hi.
A lot of the audience come from banks that are pretty small.
Yeah.
And don't necessarily have big analytical teams inside their organizations, but may want to leverage AI for their business development opportunities.
Yeah.
What do you suggest?
So there are kind of 3 core things that you can do there. Number one, you can look to try to hire somebody internally, and there are a couple places you can hire from. You can hire fairly cheaply out of academia at times. So there are a number of AI researchers that want to flip over to the corporate world. That's one. They have a deep understanding of kind of the models that are in place, how to use the data. Some are even adept at leveraging the technology. The other side of it is you kind of need 3 pieces to really have a success. You have to have somebody who understands the technology. There's a lot of open source libraries that are available and out there to take and use. That's one. The second is somebody to understand what are the models or things you're actually trying to accomplish, and being able to kind of analyze that and piece that together. And then the third one is actually basically the teams are going to help validate and quality test those different things. So it's kind of a joint effort. And one of the biggest things I recommend is not having linear but very kind of horizontal organizations, truly evaluating what is our data strategy, what do we want to do with this, what are the small incremental steps we can take, do we go with a third party versus building it ourselves. There's a lot that goes into it, but it's incredibly important because this is going to drive experience and interaction moving forward. All right, that is it for time. I really, really appreciate all of you today. Thank you very much for coming, and have a great day.